Is it time to put your remodel on hold because of these tariffs? Or are things not as bad as they seem? To start with, let's talk about what types of materials are going to be impacted. So the kinds of things that are going to be impacted are primarily imported products. Primarily imported products that you cannot make here. So first off, you've got mostly like cheap house flipper type materials. So imported Chinese cabinets, cheap LVP, cheap laminate flooring, those types of products are going to get more expensive and be more comparable with more domestic products. The cheapest remodels are going to get a little bit more expensive. Those are the ones that are going to be highest impact. Other building materials are going to be hardware. So both steel hardware and nails and hardware to fasten lumber together, as well as finish hardware like doorknobs and hinges. That is going to be impacted significantly because it's not made a lot here in the States. Next, a lot of plumbing and electrical fixtures are made in China and Asia and other places, and those are going to have a significant impact. Another one is appliances. There are some appliances made here in the States, but not very many. And even the ones that are made here, they're importing components. So for sure, appliances, plumbing, lighting fixtures are going to have the highest impact. Next, you've got lumber, OSB, and drywall. So with OSB and drywall, these are imported from Mexico, Canada, and overseas. A lot of OSB is coming out of Canada. Now, we've already had since 2017 about a 14.5% tariff on Canadian lumber, including this. What they're talking about doing is basically doubling that tariff with, at least currently, some exceptions on the overall Canadian tariffs on lumber and building materials. So worst case scenario, the tariff doubles from what it currently is, but the same impact that tariffs had on 2017 prices. Now let's talk about dimensional lumber. Dimensional lumber, a lot of the US dimensional lumber does come out of Canada. But we right here are in the Pacific Northwest. We grow most of our own lumber right here. We have very little Canadian lumber. Basically, it's limited to things like OSB, a little bit of plywood, that kind of stuff. Even most of our plywood is Columbia River Forest products. It's manufactured here. Near term, lumber prices are fine. Lumber prices are going down. OSB just dropped last week. So lumber prices that we're experiencing here in the Pacific Northwest are pretty stable, even with all of the tariff conversations. Now, a couple things to note are things that you might think would be impacted, but are likely not going to be impacted. Those things are like siding. There's a lot of siding actually manufactured here in the United States. Lumber, we've already talked about. Things like PEX piping. We saw a massive spike in PEX piping maybe 2 years ago, but that was because it was related to storms in Texas, where most of the United States PEX piping is manufactured. It's a plastic, essentially, and you would think that that's a type of product that would be imported, but actually it's manufactured here. I think a lot of the mid and higher end building materials that go into mid and higher end homes, mid and higher end referring to the finishes, a lot of those are actually manufactured here. So there's going to be a smaller impact of tariffs. Now let's talk about 3 specific project examples. Case study number 1 is going to be a kitchen remodel plus knocking down a wall, doing the flooring throughout, and a few other things throughout the home. This is a pretty typical remodel for us. It starts with the kitchen, but then we realize we want to make a big impact in the main living area of the home, but we don't want to take it to a whole home remodel and hit the bathrooms. So this project cost about $230,000. I went through the project and I pulled out things that I thought could be impacted by tariffs. Things like appliances, light fixtures, those types of products. And then if we look at the products that I pulled, that was about $11,914. So total, we're looking $16,914. And that's essentially the products that could be impacted by tariffs. Now, what are the tariffs going to be? All these products coming from different places. So we're going to look at a range of probably the total price impact to the consumer. You're looking probably on the low end, a couple $1,000s on that $16,000-ish total tariff impacted products. So relatively small, but that's best case scenario. Worst case scenario, you're looking at probably about a $5,000, $6,000 impact on all those products, and it's going to take it from like 16 plus to 21 plus. But if you look at that in terms of the cost of the overall project, that's a relatively small percentage. For this kitchen remodel, even with appliances, worst case scenario, you're looking under 3%. Ultimately, the type of price increase that if you came to your design team and said, hey, we have to save 3% on this project, there would be a way to save 3%. All right, now let's talk about a basement remodel. And this basement remodel is a fairly expensive basement remodel, but not atypical here in the Portland metro area. Often a lot of the homes, especially on the east side, they have a ceiling height that's not quite enough. And so we end up digging the foundation down, doing a new foundation, more ceiling height, finishing the space out. So for this type of a project, we're doing a lot of concrete, we're doing a fair amount of lumber, we're doing some drywall, we're doing paint, we're doing flooring. Normally we're putting in a bathroom. But the percent of the project that is impacted by tariffs is less than, say, a kitchen remodel, particularly because you don't have appliances. So for this project, it was about a $326,000 project. And if I pull out the products that I think are impacted by tariffs, and then I run it on a pretty worst case scenario, we end up with about a 1.6% impact to the total price. Because most of what we're looking at is concrete, it's lumber, it's labor, it's things that really aren't impacted by tariffs significantly. So now let's talk about how tariffs impact a home addition. Here's a $350,000 home addition. It's got a bathroom in it. It mostly adds extra living space for the client. And it's actually similar to the basement in that there's a lot of building materials. There's siding, there's windows, there's a lot of materials that are actually made here, but there are some tariff impacted products. Mostly you're talking things like HVAC, things like drywall, things like OSB, things like hardware, and lighting and plumbing fixtures. So if I pull the tariff affected products from this one, I end up with only about a $16,000 impact on things that I know are impacted by tariffs. Then I run that kind of on worst case scenario, absolute worst case scenario, all these products probably get another 50% of cost added on top of them. And if I look at that with the overall project cost in mind, it still keeps it under that 3% of the total project cost, which on an addition this size is a significant amount of money, but actually a relatively low impact. And there's probably things that the design team could do to shave off about 2.5–3%. So my case studies here also square with what the National Association of Home Builders and other organizations have done in terms of their studies and case studies the past few weeks to determine the impact of these tariffs on housing and what's likely to happen. Ultimately, it's good news for those of us that want to remodel our homes, where the impact of tariffs that we see now and projected over the next year are going to actually be significantly less than the impacts of inflation that we've seen the past 5 years. If you want to know what your remodel is going to cost, you can get a starting idea by going to our website, clicking on costs, and using our remodeling cost calculator.